Okay, so just to introduce ourselves and say a little bit about this evening. So we're running this session with the intention of being as useful as possible to everyone. My name's John Coates. I work at Hallam Teaching School, based at Notre Dame in Sheffield. We've also got Alistair Gittner with us from the Sheffield Associate Research School. And Alistair will be talking to us about what the evidence says about making tuition as effective as possible. And then probably the bit you're really coming to hear about is the expert input from the St Wilfrid's English Hub. So we're really pleased that Andrew, Lucy and Nick are able to be with us to talk to us a little bit about what the English Hub do, and also just explore some of the national tuition providers from the point of view of the English Hub. So that's what we're going to be doing this afternoon. Just to say, this is one of 3 events we're running this week. So this evening's the English Hub event. We're doing similarly with the science tomorrow afternoon, confusingly, they're all slightly different times. And then on Thursday evening, we're going to run a similar event with the Maths Hub. All 3 events broadly start off the same, but obviously it's that Curriculum Hub specific input at the end, which will be different in each case. So I think I've said that's the overview for this evening, and we'll just crack straight on, and we'll talk a little bit about the National Tutoring Programme. So this has been funded to the tune of about £1 billion by the governments. They put £1 billion into COVID recovery. Part of that money has come into schools as a COVID recovery fund. So our schools have all been given an extra amount of money to spend on closing the COVID gap, and the remainder of that £1 billion has been put into the National Tutoring Programme. And there are 2 strands that we need to be aware of for the National Tutoring Programme. That the first part is the NTP Tuition Partners, which is what we're going to be focusing on, and the English Hub are going to be talking mainly about later, and Alistair's going to be talking about also. And there's also the strand which is the NTP Academic Mentors. Both of those strands do broadly the same thing. I'll talk a bit more about the differences later, but the simplest way to think about the difference between them is that the tuition partners, you're accessing tutors who are employed by organisations that are external to your school, whereas the academic mentors, they are people that you would actually, again, they're subsidised, but you would employ them. Your school would employ those people, and those are specifically targeted at the most disadvantaged schools. Whereas with the tuition partners strand, there's a little bit more flexibility about the students you're supporting. I've put the National Tutoring website at the bottom. All the information we're sharing tonight is there, and there are links to more information about the individual tuition partners on their site also. So this first strand, the NTP Tuition Partners, this is where you're accessing tutors who are not members of your school workforce. And it's set up so that schools buy what are subsidised blocks of 15-hour blocks of tuition. So you sign up and say, I want X numbers of students tutored, and those students get a subsidised 15-hour block of tuition. And 75% of the cost of that tuition is covered by the National Tuition Programme. When you go on to look at the NTP website, and you can see the list of tuition partners, that there are costs given. So for example, it might say there's a cost of £180 for a 15-hour block of tuition. That £180 is the 25% you pay. There's obviously another 500 and something pounds in that case that would be covered by the NTP programme centrally. The NTP site is very clear that the subsidised tuition is designed primarily to support disadvantaged students, but actually they're also very clear that individual schools have got discretion as to which pupils you choose to access the support. So you don't have to limit the NTP tuition to disadvantaged students, but obviously encourage you to think about prioritising those students, because generally it'll be the disadvantaged students whose families are at least well equipped to put in place a sort of tuition, you know, your typical middle class family will be able to consider. The NTP tuition support is small group or individual, and again, if you log onto the site and look at the different providers, They'll say whether they offer 3-to-1 small group or 1-to-1 tuition. Some of the providers focus on support for SEN students, for example, and they're explicitly it's just 1-to-1. Some offer either or. In terms of the subjects that you can access for these blocks of tuition, at secondary, there's 5 subjects where you can access tuition: English, math, science, the humanities and MFL. At primary, it's restricted to 3, literacy, numeracy and science. And I think I put the last bullet point there, just I think provide a little bit of reassurance that, you know, if a tuition partner is listed on the NTP site, they have gone through a rigorous selection process. So you can have confidence in the organisation. I think there was something like 389, 400 applications to be approved tuition partners, and there are only, I think, 32 approved nationally. So there's been a high bar there set. I think interestingly as well, my own personal experience, we've registered on the site for a couple of the providers, and we've already had extensive information back, quick responses, you know, thinking about safeguarding data protection and so on. So, you know, these organisations are used to working with schools and the various things that schools need to think about. How do you access this support? On the NTP website. I don't know whether the English Hub may show us later, but you type in Sheffield, and there's some buttons you can click to say I'm interested in English at Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 2, whatever it is, and the website filters for you to those providers that offer what you've requested in our area. And there's simply an expression of interest form which you fill in, and as I say, our experience having done this with a couple of the tuition providers is, you know, we've had a response same day, and the wheels are in motion already, so that they're set up to respond quickly. The NTP site says, although it's not very clear what the mechanism for this will be, that if there is a high demand, then there will be caps introduced. I think there's funding for something like 250,000 blocks of tuition in total, and it's easy to see how those blocks could be oversubscribed. So there is a mechanism behind the scenes that will kick in if there's high demand. And again, a little bit cryptic, but I watched a webinar that the NTP put on, and they alluded to the fact that there may be extra places becoming available later. Well, although again, that was cryptic, and there wasn't any more information provided about that. The academic mentoring is the other strand. I'll mention that briefly. So this is a strand where Teach First recruit, train and support academic mentors who are then employed by your school. Now those academic mentors have a wage of, I think, £19,000. Now the wage itself is covered by the National Tuition Programme, and the employing school picks up the tab for the on costs. So that would be pension contributions and employer national insurance contributions. Don't quote me on the figure I'm giving you, but that will be round about £6,000 on a salary of £19,000. So again, it's a heavily subsidised way of getting some extra support for your students. There are, I believe, about 200 of these academic mentors have already started work in school after October half term. And Teach First have got a second wave of academic mentors who are being trained at the moment, who are ready to start work in January and February. The model that Teach First run is that each mentor works with approximately 50 students in a school. And because they've only got funding for 1,000 mentors nationally, they're restricting the number of mentors per school. And they're also prioritising schools by deprivation. I was just trying to trying to find out how many schools there are in the country. I know there's sort of 2,500 or so secondary schools, and you know that will mean there's at least 10,000 primary schools. So you know, there aren't going to be enough mentors for each school to have one, even if they all wanted one. So there is going to be that prioritisation that they're going to need to do. The mentors will provide tuition in particular subjects, and again there I've just listed the subjects that the academic mentors are able to provide mentoring with. I think just to spend a moment before handing on to Alistair, you know, is your school likely to be eligible, you know, to be prioritised as having a sufficiently high deprivation? Well, looking on the Teach First website, I've cut and pasted their criteria there. and they're using two measures for that prioritisation. The first is a deprivation index. Now, despite my best efforts, I've not been able to track down where you can get that number for your school. So, my advice there would be just to contact Teach First. But the second metric they use is the Achieving Excellent Areas category. Now, here, I know most of the people on this call are from Sheffield or South Yorkshire. The categories for the local authorities in South Yorkshire, well, Rotherham is a category 4, Sheffield is category 5, and if your school is in Barnsley or Doncaster, then you're category 6. So just by virtue of being in South Yorkshire, our schools will trigger at least one of the measures necessary. But my advice there is, if you think your school circumstances are that you probably should qualify for a mentor and you're interested in one, my advice would be to get in contact with Teach First directly, and there's contact details on the NTP website for them. So that's an introduction to the tutoring programme, what it's all about. I'm going to hand over to Alistair, who's going to pick up and talk about the evidence base around effective tuition in schools.
Good afternoon, folks. Could you move on to the next slide, please, John? Or whoever's moving on. Thank you. So I've put into the chat the sort of some links through to some documents provided by the Education Endowment Foundation and also the National Tutoring Programme, and that will give you where some of this information has come from. There have been numbers of systematic reviews and meta-analysis, and the EEF have done some reviews which has been used to give this advice, and it's quite clear that tutoring is a successful way of improving student outcomes, and that it improves the most disadvantaged students the most, and also it is very effective with low prior retaining students. So there's lots of positives for one-to-one tutoring. Cynically, I've heard people say that tutoring works because middle-class parents pay so much for it, and if it didn't work, they wouldn't pay for it. So that we know that one-to-one tutoring is one of the things that is going to be successful. But there are some key points that people should consider when you are looking at tutoring, because and the evidence can help us with some of this. So that you can see some of the key points there. The first thing is that it's most effective when it aligns with classroom teaching, so that ideally the school will be able to tell the tutors what the students need to be able to do, and it should have a clearly defined focus as to what the block of tutoring should be aiming to achieve. Now, as it says in number 2, this could be content or it could be specific skills, and it's important that this is monitored so that you can see the impact of the tutoring, but also that the students can see the effects of the tutoring when they're going back into the classroom. They themselves can feel that they are being successful. And both of those two things need good communication between the school and the tutors. And so it might be useful that you have somebody in the staff of the school that can coordinate the information and deal with the tutors, so that there's a good exchange of information in both directions. Initially starting off, talk to the tutors about what children need to be able to do, and then also feeding back from the tutors to the teachers. We've seen evidence that the students can do this, or they can't do this yet, and this is still progressing. The evidence about when to do the tutoring seems to be that it helps with the school being within the school day. Those studies which looked at after school sessions discovered that the big problem there is consistent attendance, and it's a lot easier for schools to manage this if it's within the school day. This could include breakfast and lunch, but it could also include lessons. Often this needs to be some sort of rotation so that students aren't missing the lessons for which they're getting the tutoring on top of it, so that it could be making sure that those are planned and fitting in with what with the tutoring programme. The size of the groups is also being looked at, and it seems to vary with age, it can vary with subject, and it can vary with the ability of the students. There are studies that show the effectiveness of one-to-one over small group, but then there are a few studies that show the effectiveness of small groups. And there are certainly cost-effective advantages of using groups of perhaps 2 or 3 students, and that is the one that is recommended to start off with. But allowing for in that knowledge that the school might have, that there could well be students with special educational needs or particular concerns, where it may be that a one-to-one tutoring is more preferable. And so again, it comes back to this good communication between the school and the tutors to see what's working. It could be that a student isn't working well in a small group and so needs to be drifted into a one-to-one session. But the evidence around this is that small groups of 2 to 3 are effective. One-to-one might be better, but the cost-effective compromise is to go with small groups. And it's also important that while we're doing the tutoring, we are actually monitoring and evaluating what's going on. And it could well be that we need to do some assessments, and these again could fit in with what the normal assessments that are happening in the classroom, and so that we can see what's working, and also the students can see that it's being effective. Go to the next slide, please. So as John has already said, the expectation will be that the majority of the students chosen are eligible for pupil premium. But again, with all of this, there is the school context to be taken into consideration, and the schools will know their students best, and there could well be other students that need to be taken into consideration. It could also be that some of the pupil premium students, it may well be known within the school that they are not going to respond well to an external tutor coming in, and so that again there is a allowance within the system for schools to be able to choose the groups. The makeup of the groups is again a topic that people have looked at with the research, and there seems to be some suggestions that in some studies streaming it so that you would pick out groups of have students working together of a similar ability might work. But then there are other studies that have looked at mixed ability groups, and there's quite a lot of evidence that suggests that peer-to-peer support within these small groups can be useful, so that you may go for a mixed ability group where a more able student will be able to provide help and assistance, and maybe some nudging and working with a lower prior ability student. And so again, it's down to the school to think about what's going to be the best thing for their particular groups of students. It also seems that short bursts work well, so you may not put students into a group for a whole year. It may be that they have a number of regular sessions over 6 weeks and then perhaps come back to it later on in the year with different students taking advantage of the service in between. And then finally, the last two are all about this good relationships and pupil buy-in. And this again has been shown to be quite important. And so it's important how you sell this to the students. And again, thinking about timing might be effects. That's why I think after school might be seen as a punishment perhaps for children. And so it could be that it's better to be done in the school day. How it's sold to parents, the nature of the groups might be important as well in doing this. And so again, all of these things are about good communication and making sure this happens. And this may be why having somebody in school who oversees this, it may well be a good idea in terms of ensuring that this communication happens. I've put some links to the evidence, as I said, in the chat, and I'm happy to stay here if there are people who have any questions about any of this, but that's what the evidence says.
Thanks, Alistair. Andrew, are you taking over control at this point?
Yeah, I can share my screen. That's great, and thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to Lucy for the first part, and hopefully the right slides will come up at the right time. And Lucy, the protocol is that just like the Downing Street briefings, you just say next slide, please.
Okay, so we're beginning this evening really just with a brief introduction to the work of the English Hub. The English Hubs were set up in order to offer support to schools to improve the teaching of phonics, early reading and early language in reception in year 1. And actually this year we've extended to year 2 due to the effects of lockdown and COVID. There's been a recognition that actually those year 2s are carrying on with more of those year 2 children are needing to access phonics. And obviously this year they will be taking the phonics screen check as well. So the support on offer comes through a variety of routes. We have showcase events in teaching phonics language and love of reading. These are happening next term. And again, due to lockdown and due to COVID, these are being run virtually. And they offer an opportunity to talk through that systematic approach to the teaching of phonics and actually see it in practice. We give support to develop action plans. These are bespoke to schools and they throw up key priorities through discussions with us. We work on those and help you to develop action plans. Reading audits for eligible schools. These can be booked in with us at the Hub. And really they're a self-assessment tool through support and through working with us. It's assessing where you are as a school and again, pinpointing where the support is needed and how, as an English Hub, we can support you to address those issues. For eligible schools, there is funding for training and resources. The training and resources are for systematic synthetic phonics, an SSP for your school. And if you become an eligible school, there is funding available of up to £6,000 in order to access training and, as I say, resources. In addition to this, if you do become a partner school, this funding also comes with 6 days of support from a literacy specialist. At the moment, we're working with 29 schools who are working with us this year. And actually, we are looking for our 3rd wave of partner schools who the support will kick in September 2021. So in response to the effects of lockdown and COVID, the DFE recognised that actually the priorities this year have shifted slightly. And the 3 priorities this year are COVID recovery, targeted support and engagement. So COVID recovery, that really encompasses our work with partner schools, giving that really intensive support to those partner schools who've been eligible for that funding and literacy specialist support. But also there is another layer of support that we offer, and that's through planned training events. Now, these are free to all schools. They're planned throughout the year. And these are advertised through Twitter and our English Hub website. And they're really based around, we've looked at where the needs are in schools. And so they address areas such as the role of the reading lead and how we develop that in school, guidance around supporting pupils with the phonics screen. Obviously that includes the year 2s and the year 1s this year. Sessions on targeting the gaps in learning, that's key with those children who have missed so much schooling and have had to access remote learning, and sessions around developing vocabulary. As I say, they are free to all schools, and that's part of our COVID recovery support. Targeted support, this is where I've already mentioned audits. Schools can contact us to book an audit. These can be run either face-to-face, but obviously in the current climate, we also offer these remotely. And as I say, they're a chance to self-assess where you are as a school and an opportunity to discuss what's happening in your school at the moment and how to move forward regarding early reading and phonics. The engagement is through our virtual showcases, through our audits, and then that consideration for becoming a Wave 3 partner school. If there are certain criteria for schools to fit, but if you fit that certain criteria, then there is funding and support available. That support, as I said, kicks in September 2021, but this year it's about engaging with us and assessing whether you're eligible to become a Wave 3 partner school. Okay, next slide, Andrew.
Thank you. I think it's me now. Sorry, these are flying in a random order. So kind of why focus on reading? Well, we know that early reading is key to a school's recovery strategy, and it's fundamental to a pupil's kind of future success. And we know from research that being not just learning to read, but becoming a frequent reader is more of an advantage than coming from a well-off family. And in terms of that strategy, often people try to kind of separate out the reading for pleasure and the learning to read through the systematic synthetic phonics. And we know from experience that reading isn't very pleasurable if you can't decode accurately and confidently. So that's systematic synthetic phonics, high quality teaching needs to be at the core of the school. And our aim is that they not only learn to read, but go on to choose to read and want to be frequent readers. So thinking just a few reflections from, I'm calling it lockdown 1.0, and what worked. So just from our own schools where we've been working, and from some feedback from some of the partner schools. So the teachers, we'd encourage the teachers to assign daily phonics lessons, and these were through YouTube. And this is for children who were at home at the time. So the appropriate lessons were assigned to the pupils. They accessed them remotely. They also had access to decodable books, and when they kind of ran out, we then moved to e-readers, more for practical reasons. And the teachers kind of gave a short introduction to those, so that was that personal connection. And really positively, many children, as you can see here, continued to make progress in phonics while they were at home. And we had similar feedback from some other settings who we worked with as well. So I think the question is who could benefit from tutoring in phonics, and then whether or not the National Tutoring Programme is the best option for the child. So our focus is on the lowest 20% of pupils. Now, within that, I would say that doesn't mean if you have a high proportion of really high needs pupils with EHCPs who have a significant developmental delay, we're not necessarily talking about those pupils, although we might be in some cases, but we'll be talking about the next kind of tier up in terms of pupils who often are disadvantaged, we know kind of statistically. But fundamentally, any child who's not keeping up with the pace of your phonics programme. And so when you're considering, is the National Tutoring Programme going to be the best option for the child? Well, we know, as John and Alistair have said, that it is subsidised, so there's that financial incentive. It might be worth looking at, well, what have you got available kind of from your existing staff, and who would be the most suitable person to work with the child? So when we think about this group of children, so often they might be young, but they could also be the lowest 20%. They could be children who are at that early reading stage in older year groups. And certainly for some of our younger children and more vulnerable children, we'd have to consider, is working with a familiar adult or an unfamiliar adult going to be better? Who's going to be best placed to kind of do that? And who's available, because we know that schools are extremely stretched at the moment. And it would also be worth considering, we've got a limited resource, but as part of, obviously we're promoting the early reading focus at the moment, but it's also worth considering, might the NTP be more suitable to another area, either for that child or for other children in your school, because it's about prioritising. So John's mentioned this already. So we know that the providers have been through a rigorous process already. So I'm not going to repeat that. But it might be that the in-house teachers could be the best placed people to do that teaching of phonics. Again, it depends on who you've got available, and it might be that schools use some of their the 650 million catch-up funding around the intern to cover the internal tuition. So again, it's thinking about, well, who have you got, which children are the neediest in this area, and what's going to be the best approach to those children. I'm going to pass back to Lucy to talk about effective tutoring.
Okay, so when we're talking about effective tutoring, what does this actually look like? So assessment really is the starting place in order to identify any child falling behind. And really the important thing is identifying the gaps in the phonic knowledge. All SSPs should come with a very rigorous assessment tool. And as I say, this is your starting place in identifying those children. Like Andrew has mentioned the lowest 20%, but actually it's any child that isn't at age related, that's falling behind, that needs to be identified. So daily one-to-one sessions in addition to the core SSP sessions. So once children are identified from those rigorous assessments, then extra sessions need to plug the gaps. What we're aiming for is keep up, not catch up. So it's identifying the gaps and then setting those one-to-one sessions in addition to the core SSP. Adults trained and confident in the delivery of the SSP, that's about building that team of experts, reading teachers. So that's including teachers and TAs. And it's about everybody who's involved with that delivery, about knowing the purpose of those sessions and how exactly to target those children. Following the SSP one-to-one lessons guidance. And again, this should come part and parcel of your systematic synthetic phonics approach in schools. It's in order to have very clear steps and targets when running interventions. They should be short but effective in order to plug those gaps. It's very important that interventions just don't run. I know this has been mentioned earlier in the presentation, but very important that interventions are not just left to run and run. They should be short, targeted, but effective in addressing those gaps. And can be done effectively using a remote platform. This is really important in the current climate. We need to have those systems in place. Obviously, in case of isolation, it could be a single child, it could be a whole class, it could be a year group that has to isolate. And that shouldn't, the effect of that shouldn't be a stop in targeting those children. So we need to have systems in place so that actually this effective tutoring can still remain and can still happen remotely. And it's important to have it in place before it happens, so there isn't that panic in schools. So again, that's really something that needs to be in the forefront of everybody's, all schools' plans and minds, that this is set up already in place. Okay, next slide, Andrew. Okay, aligning to SSP. It is really vital that anything we do is consistent and fits exactly with the SSP that you have in your school. That consistency in approach is vital. So important information is that we know which systematic synthetic phonics programme your school uses. Ofsted and the DFE are very clear about fidelity to one SSP of proven effectiveness. So there's any strategies that you use in tutoring or any strategies you use in addition to your SSP lessons need to be aligned to the programme that you have in place. And that really is vital, and it's the clear message that is sent out, as I say, through Ofsted and DFE. There are a range of SSPs available for schools to use, but we have to ensure that we are using an accredited one. The DFE has a list of accredited SSPs, and in order to become accredited, the systematic synthetic phonics approach that you use should have rigorous assessment in place. It should come part and parcel with resources that are consistent. That includes decodable books. There should be a training package